Welcome back. In this video, we'll be talking about functions. Functions allow you to encapsulate code into reusable blocks, making your code more modular, maintainable, and powerful. Let's learn about how to create, call, and utilize functions effectively in Python. So functions are pieces of code that you can reuse. Let's look at the following example. Let's create a function that, says hi to someone. So I already have a simple print statement here, but let's make it more pretty. As you can see, the main keyword here is def. So basically this is for defining a function, and we can give it a name. So it can be greet, it can be greet human, it can be greet someone. It doesn't really matter what you write here, but this will be the name of the function. Let's for now just keep it greet. Pay attention to the colon here, similar to other structures in Python. Then we can have a simple print like a hello, welcome to this tutorial, right? And now we have defined it. It's as easy as this. So in essence, this is the easiest way to define a function. You just give it a name and give it some content. Of course, it can be multiple lines if you wish. It can also do another print. This is me. It can also have variables, but we'll see more about that. So then how do we do this? Because if we run it right now, it will only print this hi, but nothing in the greet statement. Well, this is where calling function comes into play. We have here defined a block of reusable code, and now we can, reuse it. So we can just have the name and the same bracket. You'll see what those are for in a minute. If we do this, this will just call the function. Calling the function means running its behavior in a different place from where you define it. So pay attention here to the fact that this will never run unless it's called, and this is just the definition of the function. Alright, so if you run this again, it will say welcome to the tutorial, this is me. We can remove the first two lines of code. We can also do it as many times as we want, and as you can see, we don't have to rewrite the whole thing. We just write greet and then it prints the two statements. As you can see, this can be very powerful in combination with Python loops and control structures and if statements. Of course, we can put anything we want in the function, but there's more to functions, because if we have no way of controlling the output based on a specific input, then functions might not be as useful as we want. One way of controlling the output based on the input is to have a parameter. So in this case, let's also have a function called greet, but in this case we will use the inside of those two magical brackets, and this is where we can define a variable. So in this case, the variable is name. Remember, we just write the name of the variable, and that's how we define it in Python. And then we can do the print and then say hello, welcome to this tutorial, and then you can do another print and say this is, and then we can add the name. So in this case, the difference between this function and this function is that this expects some sort of variable, and then what it does is just takes that variable and prints it. If we copy the same for greet statement, now with a parameter, let's for now remove the first one, and then we do Alice, and we do Bob, and then we do, I don't know, Carl, and then we do Dennis. And then we run it. As you can see, we just called the greet function 4 times, and we get 4 of those hello, welcome to the tutorial, this is Alice, this is Bob, this is Carl, this is Dennis. So I hope you got a feeling for what functions are used for. So basically we have this more complex piece of code and then we only use one line of code. Of course, in reality we would have much longer functions. So this can do very complex stuff or very simple stuff. But imagine we have like a huge function that does some heavy computations. We don't want to rewrite the code every time. Instead, we just call it with different parameters. You can also think of this as mathematical functions. So let's look at the following example. We can define a function such as, let's have something very simple, a function add. As you can see, we have multiple parameters here, and then this function will return something. This is a new concept. Return is the variable that will be basically the output of the function. I'm going to show you what that means in a second. So let's write it in a different line. We can have c equals a plus b, and then we can return c. So basically we have an input a and b, output c, which is a plus b. Alright, so we declare c here, we give it the value a plus b, and then we return it. In this case, this would be something like, a function call would be something like, let's have a print. We can have the sum of a and b is, and then we can do add of, let's already give it some values, so 5 and 3, let's say. You can already see that my IDE knows that the first one is a and the second one is b, and you do have to pay attention to the variables, to the order of the variables. So in this case, if we run it, as you can see, it says the sum of 5 and 3 is 8. By the way, you're gonna also hear the term arguments. Arguments and parameters are almost the same thing. Most of the times they are used interchangeably. But usually we call parameters the variables themselves, so in this case a or b, and we call arguments the values that the variables have, so in this case 5 and 3. Sometimes people use those terms interchangeably. They don't really mean the same thing, but they pretty much refer to the same concept. Alright, let's look at the following example. I've made this function here that says save log about person. Please pay attention to the parameters that it has. So it expects a first name, of course, a last name, and the birth year. And what it does is it creates a string. So basically this creates a string and returns it. So basically this is the creation, and then we put it, we return it with the return statement. So in this case, to call this function, we would have, in this case, we would call the function and print it. Please pay attention to this, to the fact that when we return things, it doesn't mean that we also print the values. In this case, we return them and then we print them. So this function call will return some sort of value, and then we have to surround it with the print statement if we want to print it. The reason we do this is because we could also do something like this. So let's have this variable called return string, and then we can cut this from here and put it here. So then if we run it this time, nothing will happen. So see, nothing prints, but the code still runs. But then we can also print the variable. So in this case, this function call saves its output to this variable, and then the variable is being printed. It's the exact same time, the exact same thing. So as you can see, first we call the function like this, then we save it into a variable, then we print the variable. We could just as easily put this inside the print statement. So pay attention. Another thing I want you to pay attention is that you need to respect the order of the parameters. So in this case, if we would not be aware of that, let's say we don't know that the first one is the first name, we would start with the parameter called 1970, thinking it's a birth year. But as you can see, the IDE doesn't really want to let us do that. It says that the first one should be first name, then it should be the last name, and then it should be the birth year. But I'm just gonna show you that the order that you give the parameters in is gonna be the order that it takes them in. It doesn't really matter if it's a string or if it's an integer or whatever the parameter is. So let's say Bobby Jackson. In this case, it gives an error because it tries to convert Jackson to it tries to print the number without converting it to a string. But once again, first one should be the name, the second one should be the first one should be the first name, the second one should be the second name, the third one should be the birth year. Do not mix them. But if you run it now, it works just as fine. We can just as easily change this. John, whatever, John Duck was born in 1972. So once again, we call the function, we save the function into a variable, we print the variable. We can also print the function statement as well. Alright, let's go to the next part of this video. Right, in this part of the video, we will be talking about global variables. So far, when we declared variables, we didn't really think about scope much, but in the context of function, it is especially important. Why is this? This is because we have a thing called global variables and we have a thing called local variables. And in the case of functions, what this means is that this number here, called number, can be accessed from wherever you want. So since it's in the root of the file, you can create a function and then call it. As you can see, if we double click this, the ID highlights it, so we know it's the same. This is a very simple function that just multiplies two numbers. But in this case, we don't use the parameters because it accesses a global variable, and that global variable is just a normal variable that it changes. So if we run this, let's run it. So then it says multiply number 10. Why is that? Because we have a global variable that's 5 and it multiplies it by 2. Now let's look at the other way around. So if we want to have a print statement here that would print result, this would not work because result is defined inside the function and we can only access it inside that specific function. If we want to print result, we can do it inside the function, so this would work. Or we have to somehow return it from the function using the return keyword. So if we use the return keyword, then this becomes part of the output of the function, but unless we return it, that is a local variable, so it's specific to that function. Alright, let's look at the final thing about functions that I wanted to show you today. So in Python, we can also have the so-called default parameters. Those are a special kind of parameter that unless it's given a value, it has a, well, default value. So in this case, we have the function greet that we've used before. And then, as you can see, there is this equal sign next to the parameter name. What's nice about this is that we can also now call it without a parameter and it will still work. And when this name parameter is not used, it will get the default value, but if it's used, it will get the value in the parameter. Let's look at this example. If we run this, as you can see, this one will not have anything, so the name will take the value stranger, and then it will say, stranger, welcome to the tutorial. But then if we want to be more specific, we call the same function with the parameter Bob, and then it will say, Bob, welcome to the tutorial. So this is nice when we don't know if the programmer that is gonna is gonna call this function will use the parameter or not, or if we want to enable some flexibility in our coding without having to write different functions. This is really neat for that use case. Alright, this has been it for this short video about functions. I hope I'll see you in the next one.